So this is an interview with Daniel Keith. The interviewers are myself, Lydia Blois, and Richard Thorne, both part of the Kings County Museum. So Daniel, please tell me your full name and if you were named after anyone.
If I'm
Named after anyone.
Daniel Mullen Keith. Daniel Keith came to New Brunswick as a loyalist and settled in New Canaan finally, and he had 12 sons and two daughters that grew to manhood. And I got a book down there behind Richard that's got 16,000 names of the descendants of that man in there.
Goodness.
And his name was Daniel, and his grandson was Daniel, and his great-great-grandson was Daniel, and that was my father, and I'm Daniel. now you ask me.
A very long line.
And of course the Mullen I was named after a grandmother on my father's side was Miriam Mullen.
Oh, okay. So that's where the Mullen comes from.
So there's my name.
And when and where were you born?
I was born in Butternut Ridge, Westmoreland County, in May of 1921. Butternut Ridge is taken off the map about 1955 or 54, in there somewhere, and the Women's Institute, among others, were really upset about it because it was the name of the original place where the Keiths and the Prices settled. They were the first two families that settled there. I walked to school every day, but the school was in Kings County, and the village that I walked through by the post office, that was Havelock. But just a little ways over from the post office was the railway station. The post office was the Butternut Ridge post office. The railway station was the Havelock railway station, so that they had the two names for the same community, and then the government shut one down, and they should have shut down Havelock. There's I think 8 or 9 Havelocks across Canada, but anyway, they shut down. It vanished. But my birth certificate says Butternut Ridge, Westmoreland County. So it was, I was across the line into Westmoreland County where I was born.
Was that on the Upper Ridge Road?
Oh yes,
Yeah.
It was the first farm on the Havelock side of the cement plant.
Oh, right.
The Hicks Settlement Road goes
Yep.
in there. Well, on this side of the Hicks Settlement Road, our farm ran from there back to the Ridge Brook, and across over the hill the other way to the railway tracks for the Petitcodiac, Havelock Railway, Elgin, Petitcodiac, and Havelock. The train would leave every day, leave Havelock at 8 o'clock in the morning, go to Petitcodiac, drive through to Elgin, and come back, and at 4 o'clock in the afternoon it was back in Havelock to stay overnight. The train did, and that's what they went.
Were
back.
the engineers Havelock men?
Yeah, oh yes, Barney Demick and L.T. Hicks and Tiny Burgess, they were all railroad men.
Right.
The Demicks, Leland Demick, you know the name.
Well, his son, Horace,
Yes.
I think married my aunt.
Okay.
Mary.
Yeah, and they lived down across the road from John Corey. It was always Roy Corey had the grist mill, and
Yeah.
we used to haul our grain down there to get a ground for the livestock, and we paid the miller took his toll when measuring the grain as it come out, and there would be so many bushel for us and then a bushel for him. That was his pay. That was what they called the miller's toll. And we never had any money but that's the way it was done.
Right.
And we go down to Roy Corey's mill.
Was he the only mill for most of the area for grain?
Yes, he was the only mill. He couldn't handle buckwheat, and I think our buckwheat went to somebody maybe in Kent County, so that we got buckwheat meal for pancakes, and we were all set. And Van Keith had a mill going from further on up the ridge, going from the road across to Kelms Mills.
Right.
And I used to go up there sometimes to get grain ground too.
Right.
Benjamin Keith, little Ben. He drove he had a little strawberry roan horse, or small horse, and a two-wheel cart, and I can still see him in my mind, driving by to go to Havelock to do shopping, and a little round flat. It just reminded me of one of John Dickens' characters. This little guy. That was when I was a child. I remember.
Did you have to go to the post office to get mail?
Yeah. No. We were on our number 3. No, we had a mailbox. But we'd go to the post office to mail letters. Later on, I remember going on horseback, and we'd go on horseback. I would go down to the post office to get the mail, and then I didn't have any saddle or anything on the horse, so somebody would have to lift me back up to get back on the horse, and I could go back home with the mail. But our address was our number 3 in Havelock.
Were the Thornes still running the post office in your day?
Oh yeah, oh yes. And
So,
across from the Thorne was Mrs. Founds, Gloriana Founds,
right.
and her parrot that she had picked that up on her travels around the world with her husband in his sailing ship.
She was a Price, wasn't she?
Yes, she was,
Yeah.
Gloriana Price, and Mrs. Hill Keith was a sister, and Mrs. Vivian and
Louise.
who were they?
McNeil.
McNeil. So Mrs. McNeil, Dr. McNeil was a minister.
Right.
Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that. I knew the McNeils were there.
Yeah, well, his wife was a sister to Mrs. Founds.
Right.
Yeah.
Now,
Daughter.
were there a lot of other stores around the post office at that time?
Beg pardon?
Were there a lot of other stores around the post office at that time?
Yes, there was a store right beside the post office, and a general store, and not very far from it, across the street, was the farmer's store, and not very far from it, in the other direction, was the mercantile store. So there was three general stores there in Havelock at the time. Earl Saunders.
Right.
And then Hill Keith and Lucy. Do you know all of that bunch? Well, and Mrs. Hill Keith was a sister of Mrs. Founds.
Right.
I've worked out some genealogy for a couple of years ago. I ran into at the Keith reunion, somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Are you Daniel Keith?" And I said, "Yes, I'm one of them," because there's 2.
Yes.
There's 2 here. But
Right.
this fellow that tapped me on the shoulder, he says, I said, "Who are you?" He says, "I'm Daniel Keith, too." And I said, "Where are you from?" And he said, "San Antonio, Texas."
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
And so I dug out, I didn't have time, well, it was circumstances, I didn't find out who he was there that day. And afterwards I had communication with him, and he was a descendant of Hilke, so I gave him the whole 9 yards of I knew I didn't know his grandfather, but his grandfather was one of the sons, and those people, with the exception of 2, had all gone to the States when probably before I was born. Everybody went to the Boston States in the early 1900s, and anyway, Lucy remained a spinster, and she was the only girl in that family, and she ran the mercantile store, and she bought and sold pulp and had loaded on the train, and she was quite the lady, and she ran it for years. When I left home at the outbreak of the war, why she was still there, and she was alive afterwards, but I think somebody else was running it, the store then.
Right. Was it still owned by the White family at that point, or was it owned right in Havelock?
Oh, that never was owned. That never was owned by the White family that I know of. My wife was connected, and Mary's mother grandmother was one of the Whites. You remember, well, you were young, but was Dr. Hatfield White?
Yes.
Well, Anne's grandmother was Dr. White's sister.
Oh.
Anne's mother was a Van Wart.
Okay.
And her mother was Annie Allen Hume.
Neat. Very neat. You
And
don't hear that very
and her
often.
grandmother was Mary Jane Long. And there's a sampler hanging here on the wall that Mary Jane Long
Did.
The stitching that they did, and Mary Jane Long did it when it's signed. It has her name on it, and it says age 9 years, and she was born in 1836. So that she did this sampler that's hanging here in the hall was made in 1845.
Where were this particular branch of the Van Warts from?
Her grandfather, that family of Van Warts were from Fredericton. They were the Fredericton Van Warts. And
they were quite prominent merchants.
Yeah, there
Yes.
there was Dr. Klaus Van Wart for one, and Anne's father was a lawyer, was the mayor of grandfather was the mayor of Fredericton.
Right.
And
Wesley.
that was Anne's grandfather Van Wart.
Yeah. Because the Van Warts are all one family ultimately, but
Well,
but they all from New York, from Sleepy Hollow.
and I've got the book. I got the Sleepy Hollow book of the 1700s with the baptisms and marriages and everything.
Yeah.
I have Mary, I guess, did I write the history of the Van Wart?
Yes, you did, pretty much, right back to...
Right back to the time when they left Amsterdam, or left Holland.
I've
in
never
the 1600s.
seen it back that far. I'm just
Well,
kind of aware of Jacob the Loyalist and all those boys coming.
It was Joachim and Isaac and William and Garrett,
Yeah.
4 brothers that came from with the Loyalists.
Yeah.
4 brothers, and I had the material, and I put it together from the Loyalist family right down to about 1930, and I had the whole thing, and I turned it over to the
Archives.
Fredericton Archives.
Oh, right.
I have all the background material here. You got to come sometime, and you got a weekend to spend.
Right.
Now, have you always been interested in genealogy?
Pardon?
Were you always interested in genealogy?
No, not as a young person. I wasn't.
No. What did you like to do when you were young?
We had quite a life. We lived on a farm, and my father died in 1930, and I was 9 years old, and there was 9 in the family, and by that time, two members of that family were already grown up and away, and I don't ever remember them living at home.
No, your two oldest siblings.
And I was next to the youngest. There was one boy younger than I.
And there was, right before Dad, there were twins. So Dad was sandwiched between twins and the youngest in the family. And Dad was in
the middle child.
the middle of that little
Yes.
cluster.
The parents I've learned now that both parents had to have a gene for red hair, which is a recessive gene, and both parents had to have it to produce a redhead, and 2 of my brothers were redheaded, and 2 of my sisters were redheaded, and as far as I know, a whole bunch of the Keiths that I know, there was a Spurge Keith that had the Register of Deeds in Hampton. His son George, I think, worked for the breweries, and he had the orangest red hair, a real bushy crop that I ever saw on anybody. It was, and he came from the Cornhill Keiths, and a bunch of them were redheaded. Roy Allward that had the lime works, his wife was one of them.
Yes, she was.
And she was a redhead. And
well, my great-grandfather's mother was a Keith. She was Sarah Keith. And my great-grandfather, Grandpa Charlie Thorne, lived on the Canaan Road. Yeah. Charlie had red hair.
I got off the subject.
Did get off the subject.
I don't remember.
What did you do as a child?
Oh yeah,
So that
no,
would've-
yeah, we were
meandering around.
Some of the things for fun, like the dances at the house, or the part where people would come talk about some of and the skating, how sometimes they'd let you off school if the
half holidays. Oh yeah, at school. At home, when we were smaller, the local community, the older members of my family, my sisters, and George, their group, they'd come to our house 2 or 3 times, maybe through the year, and have a square dance, and mom would play the organ, and somebody would come with an accordion, and somebody with a violin. I should know who they were, and anyway, as kids, we were allowed to stay up until they had the first break, and then they served ice cream, even in the summer, and this was homemade ice cream. And the ice for the ice cream, you know where the cement plant is?
Yes.
Richard? Well,
yeah.
Right across the road from where the buildings are, almost in the ditch, there was a cave there, which we called Archie's Hole. Mm-hmm. And Archie, I think there was an Archer Allward that owned that farm.
Yes, there was.
Archer. And so this was Archie's. And we could go up to that place in the summertime and get ice out of that cave and make ice cream.
Oh my goodness.
And so we were allowed to stand up and to stay up until the interval in the dance, and they'd serve ice cream, and then we'd get shunted off to bed.
Right.
I don't know. I don't think it happened in our house. The story about such an event was going on at the house, and the little boy come running back downstairs, or started downstairs in his pajamas, and his mother caught a hold of him and said, you can't come down here in your pajamas. So he went back and took his pajamas off and went down in his skin.
Oh my gosh.
He said, with your pajamas on, you can't come in. I just took them off and went down in my skin.
Oh my goodness.
I think there was a song that had that. I don't know that might have been fictional. We had skating. We used to go to the mill pond. Now the mill pond was the pond where Roy Thorne had the pond built to run his grist mill.
Yep.
There across from where John lives. It's pretty well all washed out, but there used to be a great big, a huge big pond there, and ice, and we'd have a campfire there, and no buildings or anything. You sat on a log and put your skates on, and it didn't matter how cold it was, but there'd be a bonfire going, and we'd go there. We'd drive down. I remember driving with the team in what they called the market sled, and they'd throw a bunch of straw on the bottom of it, and we had blankets, and we'd get covered up in that and go get hauled down to the rink to go skating in the summertime. We played baseball at home. At home, we always had a couple of gloves and a baseball. Must have been my oldest brother played, I think, for the baseball team when they used to have a league with Havelock and Petticodiac and Penobscot and Sussex and Norton. I can remember seeing Bart Yoxer hitting the ball. You remember the name Bart Yoxer?
I certainly do.
Yeah, well, I remember seeing him hitting the ball, and he couldn't run any faster than I don't know what, but he could hit the ball so far that he didn't have to run very hard. But anyway, and then we had in just around the farm, the neighbors, we had pickup games of baseball, and at our place we always had a catcher's mitt, and I was the catcher, and then we'd go, well, let's go have a catch, so we would throw the ball back and forth, and then some just batting it and getting everybody to chase it or try to catch it or something. We played that. One time I played a pickup game with just the other group in the community, and my oldest brother George was pitching and I was catching. And a right-handed batter would come up to the plate, and my brother would pitch that with his right arm, and that would just come like a shot, almost up in me, but I'd hold it and got it back to him. But when the left-hand batter came up, my brother would change his spin and pitch with his left hand.
Oh.
And that really boxed him. And all I was able to do was to get a hold of it somehow. I don't know, but I was able to catch it. But I never saw anybody. I never heard of anybody that could do that. And this ball was either way that he was throwing, it was at the same speed, and it would curve or it would do this or that. And sometimes I didn't know what it was going to do, but it sort of landed in my mitt anyway.
Right.
But and we'd go swimming. We'd go swimming. The brook was about a mile. Well, that end of our farm was about a mile from the buildings at home, and we'd go down there in the brook swimming, and the cow pasture, we had to go through a long lane beside the cement plant where the little girls were lost. You know.
Oh, the little Keith girls,
Eliza
yes.
and
Yeah,
Mary Ann.
Eliza and Mary Jane were next door. We'd go through that long lane, and our cattle were way down that end of the farm through the day. And from when we stepped out of the swimming hole up onto the bank, we could see our farm buildings from where we were. And when it was time for us to cut that out and get dressed and come home and bring the cattle home, it'd be 4 o'clock, and Mom would hang out a white grass seed bag on the upstairs window in the woodshed, just hang it out. We'd say, "Oh, there's the flag. It's time for us to go."
Right.
So
you had some chores to do too, did you?
Oh, yes, we were milking. We were milking when I imagine before I went to school. I don't remember seeing it, but they tell me that my father had made a milking stool so the twins could milk, and he'd shove the milking stool right under the cow, and one of them sat on each side of the cow, and the pail sat on the stool in the middle.
Poor cow.
Yeah. That was, and I think that I saw the stool, but I never saw the twin. I never saw them doing it.
How many head of cattle would you have been milking?
A dozen.
It's a pretty good number.
Yeah, but our barn, the cow stable was rebuilt in 1927, I think it was. There was a date off the Canada cement calendar.
Right.
That had 1927, and I could see it was nailed on one of the timbers in the barn, 1927.
There's a story about riding the horse to school. You used to sometimes ride the horse to school and then send it.
Once or twice we skated to school on a big freshet in the wintertime when it would and then everything would freeze, and we could skate right on the snow. And we put our skates on and put our shoes or rubbers on our book bag along with our lunch and our books or whatever, and we could skate all the way to school. This is a mile and a half.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, that's a pretty good
skate
little hike. Yeah.
We that was the life.